From WLWT, this is Let's Talk Cincy.
Celebrating the life and legacy of an internationally renowned civil rights giant and legal scholar. Welcome to Let's Talk Cincy. I'm Alexis Rogers.
And I'm Curtis Fuller. Retired federal judge Nathaniel Jones passed away at the age of 93 on January 26. Condolences have been sent from people from all over who have been impacted by his life, including former President Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle. The historical record will note his groundbreaking work. His inspirational life is summed up best in his own words, when he said, "Being a lawyer was my calling, and that calling is the work for equal opportunity and justice for all our nation's citizens."
His influence began here in the United States, and it went worldwide.
Nathaniel Jones, a federal judge appointed by President Jimmy Carter in 1979, where he served until his retirement in 2002. Before that, Judge Jones served as general counsel for the NAACP after Thurgood Marshall was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court.
When he got to the NAACP, he helped really change the face of American society forever. But it went well beyond that.
He traveled to South Africa, helping leaders draft a constitution ending that nation's system of legal racial segregation known as apartheid. And his civil rights legacy is etched in America. Jones was a powerful voice on the federal bench.
He would influence the way decisions were being made at that court based upon the history that he brought that no one else could have shared other than he, because he had, again, been on the battlefield at the NAACP and had seen all there was to see on the ugly side of America.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Kenneth Parker says Jones impacted every person he met.
A friend to you, he'll be a mentor, open library.
It's been said that when an elder dies, that we lose an encyclopedia. It couldn't be more true for Judge Jones. The man had an amazing recall for things decades ago.
Judge Jones was a humble giant. It was an honor to watch him work, but more honorable to be able to sit and listen to his wisdom.
He's a tremendous individual whose legacy will live on in many, many ways and influence Americans and others outside of America for a very long time.
You know, in 1962, Judge Jones became the first African American to be appointed as Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. Then he was named to the United States Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals here in Cincinnati.
Let's Talk Cincy sat down with U.S. Bankruptcy Court Chief Judge Jeffrey Hopkins, and he told us about Judge Jones's impact in the legal and civil rights communities.
It was a tremendous accomplishment. He served on the bench for 23 years on the court that's just below the Supreme Court. Indeed, in fact, he was considered for the Supreme Court at one point. He was the natural choice after Thurgood Marshall, his great mentor and a person he knew very well. And I always tried to bring that out whenever we spoke together, especially in front of young audiences, because they have very little knowledge of Thurgood Marshall and Judge Jones's association together and their work to, even the playing field for all Americans. So the Sixth Circuit is 4 states, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Michigan. And when that court speaks on an issue, it decides matters that affect all of the citizens and businesses and individuals who reside in those states. And, his importance in that role can't be underscored. I mean, he was an influence on his colleagues because he had so many stories that he could share from his days on the battlefield in the civil rights movement that many of his white colleagues were unaware of. I was down in South Carolina at a judicial meeting, and there was a judge who is from South Carolina. He did not know I was from Ohio, nor that I knew Judge Jones. And he was speaking of the legacy of Nathaniel Jones in South Carolina. There was a fellow named Isaac Woodard, who was a World War II veteran. Coming back after being discharged, fighting in Europe, he was taken off of a bus in South Carolina and had both of his eyes taken out. Judge Jones, to go full circle and show you how long he's been on the battlefield for civil rights, had, as a cub reporter, written a story about Isaac Woodard that this judge went back to and and found in the Library of Congress, of all places, when he was a reporter in Youngstown. And that was really the impetus of his beginning to write about this. And he called Judge Jones, and Judge Jones's mind to the very day of his passing was as clear as a bell. And he remembered details and filled the details in for this judge who wrote this book about Woodard that's now gained quite a bit of fame. And it's being published, and it's going to be turned into a PBS movie and all kinds of things. But he spoke so well of Judge Jones, and here I was, a judge from Ohio who knew Judge Jones quite well, so I shared that story with him afterwards. I'd say for you and I and all Americans of goodwill that he summed it up in the book that he wrote, Answering the Call of America, the call that's in the Declaration of Independence, that all men and women should be treated with equality under the law. If we live out that legacy, we will certainly have honored Judge Jones. He worked very hard to help Langston Hughes fulfill the I Sing America Too. And that was the entire goal behind this man's wonderful life and answering the call.
Wow, it is amazing to see how many people that he impacted. And everyone keeps talking about that book, and we're actually going to talk about that a little bit later on today, because I've heard it's amazing.
It is amazing. Well, the distinguished career of Judge Jones puts him alongside the greats in the national law community.
Why his colleagues say Jones should be on the legal Mount Rushmore of his time.
Retired federal Judge Nathaniel Jones led an extraordinary life. Born in Youngstown in 1926, he served in the Army before receiving his law degree from Youngstown State University back in 1956. He also served as general counsel for the NAACP, following in the footsteps of Thurgood Marshall.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Cincy. I'm Jan Michelle Lemon-Kearney. In the late 1960s, Judge Jones served as Assistant General Counsel to President Lyndon Johnson's National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, also known as the Kerner Commission. Many of Judge Jones's colleagues say his name belongs on the legal Mount Rushmore, alongside the great legal minds of our time.
He is part of a pipeline, a larger tree. When you think of Judge Jones, you have to think of A. Philip Randolph. He reminded you had to think of Judge Leon Higginbotham. You had to think of Thurgood Marshall when you talked about or thought about or spoke with Judge Jones. So when you look at this tree that's growing and the acorns or the seeds that drop from the tree, as they grow up and you look at the young students and like the summer work experience of law scholars that are coming about, when you look at them, you have no choice but to think of Judge Jones, to think of A. Philip Randolph, to think of Thurgood Marshall and others.
And whatever the issue of the day, he will come forth with, particularly in the legal arena, what cases were involved, who were the participants in the cases, what the arguments they all made were, in excruciating detail. I often reflect that, given that we have lost that encyclopedia, we're fortunate that much of his, he was able to share with us much of his knowledge and his history in the book that he wrote, Answering the Call. He said, somewhat jokingly, that the original manuscript for that book was twice as long as what actually got published. So there's more to be heard from him.
The thing that people have to understand about the judge is, and he always trumpeted it, was the Kerner Commission, the 1968 report. And while there may have been people who served on that commission and afterwards the report was put in, Judge lived it, and he gave the warnings from the report. And that was that there was unfair opportunities and disparities for blacks in social services, housing, and education. And he constantly reminded individuals to which he interacted with about those problems. So for the lawyers to which he was seeking to build, he put that inside them. If you're going to practice law, you have to work to make sure that there's fairness in the system, that the injustices that are there as far as social services, education, and housing, that we work to ameliorate those problems. That is primarily a part of what you have to do to answer the call.
The loss of a father, a brother, a cousin, relative is always a very personal thing. And there's nothing that any of us can do to lessen their sense of loss. But we can all just honor you.
Judge Jones received 19 honorary degrees. In 2003, Congress passed a resolution naming the Nathanael R. Jones Federal Building and U.S. Courthouse in Youngstown, Ohio, and busloads of us went up there to see that celebration. In 2019, UC's College of Law renamed its Center for Peace, Gender, and Social Justice as the Judge Nathaniel R. Jones Center in his honor. Judge Jones has mentored dozens of people in our community. Now his legacy lives on through others. When Let's Talk Cincy returns.
Judge Jones had a major impact and footprint on the lives of many judges, especially minority judges in the city. Their relationships started when they were kids. The seeds he planted became a very big part of preserving his legacy and opening doors for attorneys and judges in the area. Judge Tyrone Yates and Judge Ted Berry are familiar and well-respected faces here at the Hamilton County Courthouse. Both agree they stand on the shoulders of those that came before them, exemplary men like Judge Nathaniel Jones.
He was best friends locally with my godfather, Calvin Conliffe. And so we would frequently be together in social settings and at the house. When I first was appointed to City Council almost 30 years ago, it was Judge Jones who was standing there.
Well, I've known Judge Jones since I was a little boy, and I grew up in his circle. And my father thought so highly of Nate that when the end was near for my father in 2000, he beckoned Nate to the nursing home where my dad was. He beckoned Nate to his bedside, and he says, "Nate, my time is short, and I want you to eulogize me at my funeral. You must think very highly of a man." And he was a military man, and my dad knew, he knew my dad when he came to speak at an NAACP event, and Nate called my dad his North Star.
Yates and Berry agree. Even in his absence, Judge Jones is still teaching valuable lessons.
Seeing all the people who either come or send notes or greetings, probably everyone from President Clinton to President Carter, who appointed him in 1979, his greatest, I think, legacy, and all the people there that he touched, and all of his clerks over the years who have been a great success and are great leaders today, including a young woman who heads all the legal work worldwide for the Motion Picture Association of America, former Cabinet Secretary Anthony Carter, and many other leaders.
Nate's legacy is that he opened up the majority firms here for minority attorneys. He chaired the BLAC roundtable for years, and I used to go there at the old Federated building for those monthly meetings where they were trying to work to open up the 4th Street, predominantly segregated white firms, to minority attorneys. And thanks to Judge Jones and others, those doors have been opened, and the major firms here have African-American partners, male and female now, where they didn't have those back in the 70s.
That was a powerful legacy. And if you go down to the river and you look at the Freedom Center, he was a partner with so many other black and white leaders in Cincinnati like Reverend Lynch and John Pepper of Procter & Gamble, and they spearheaded together along with a number of groups.
I mean, my dad would get tears in his eyes and pat himself on the chest and say, I was a poor man's lawyer, as if it was a badge of honor. You know, where are those men and women today serving the poor? There are good servants out there, but I would urge you to read his book, these young people, to see the trail that he blazed and the great legacy he left behind although a lot of work and a lot has been accomplished, much more work remains to be done. And I urge them to answer the call like Judge Jones answered the call.
And what a call that is to answer. Joining us now is former State Representative Alicia Reese. Thank you so much for joining us today. Talk to us about how big this is, Judge Jones's legacy, because you've served in many capacities.
Absolutely. One of the things about Judge Jones I think is important. He has impacted a lot of lawyers, a lot of judges, opened doors in that legal community. But, you know, here's a man who was global. I mean, he touched people globally, but lived locally. And I think, you know, meaning that he had the common touch. We worked together on a number of issues, but particularly, first of all, I'm a beneficiary of Judge Jones. Without him, I could not have voted or ran for office and those kind of things. But we also know that their works continue to be done, and that's the thing that he stressed to me. We work together on voting rights as people are being purged from the rolls and voter suppression, and he would say the fight continues. And that's what I think he means by the book of answering the call. He answered the call. He made an impact. He opened doors. He made the world a little bit better than when his generation came along. And he's saying, now I'm passing it to you to keep fighting and keep opening more doors. And so it's a major loss for us. And sometimes when people live locally, we don't appreciate their impact globally. Everywhere I would go traveling around the country, civil rights leaders, whether it's Jesse Jackson or Reverend Al Sharpton or anyone, they know when you say National NAACP, when you say Judge Nathaniel Jones, people say, whoa, we better listen, because this is a man who is well respected and has gotten things accomplished, groundbreaking things.
Yeah. He never pushed himself on anyone.
No.
But if you asked his opinion about something, asked his advice, he was very thoughtful, very thorough in giving that to you.
Absolutely, and I'm like a sponge, so I wanted to sit down with him and say, hey, give me everything you got. How did you do that? What was the strategy behind that? He would tell me about some of the losses and how he had to pick himself back up to get to the wins. And he would always say, it's not to the swift, but those who are going to continue to endure. So I'm going to definitely miss being able to pick up a phone and talk to someone, not just read about them in the history books.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Such a big legacy, and we'll share more memories of former Judge Nathaniel Jones.
That's when we return on Let's Talk Cincy.
One man came up to me and said, your father saved my life. He got me off of death row. And just people who didn't know him, people who said that they heard about him and they wanted to pay tribute to him. But everybody seemed to have some personal connection to him. And we always knew that he connected with people and loved people so much. But this was, just seeing this personified in the way it was very powerful. Even when I was really small, he always took me places with him. So I got to go and see him give speeches, and I went to meetings, and he was a very hands-on father. He was just my hero. And I know most little girls think their dad is their hero. But as I got older and started to really see how he moved in the world, and I think I was able to see it both as a daughter, but also as an admirer. And then because I went into his profession, I was always surrounded by people who just adored him and respected him. So I got to see a lot of that. One of the things I really appreciate is that I did get a chance to work with him on things and work closely with him. And we recently, in the last couple of years, started a foundation, the Call to Justice Foundation, based here in Cincinnati. And the purpose of it is to carry out his legacy. And to teach people the lessons of the civil rights movement, help encourage a new generation of civil rights activists and lawyers. Because one of the things I realized, and I realized this in reading his book, is that he has so many lessons about how he did things. and that the civil rights movement, the modern day civil rights movement, wasn't just marches. It wasn't just speeches. There was a lot of strategy. There was a lot of coordination. And it's important for people in this generation to know how to navigate through all of that. And how do you strategize? How do you figure out tactics? For example, marching was a tactic. It wasn't the thing. And so how do you push those levers, and how do you build the support that you need to get change done? And it can take, one of the things my dad always taught me is that it can take a long time, and you have to be very patient, and you have to not get discouraged, and you have to just keep moving forward and making change, and being able to recognize when the change comes, but it's rarely a sea change. And so don't get discouraged. And so that's something that I'm certainly going to continue working with our foundation to make sure that we're helping lawyers and activists and others better understand how to affect change. I know there were times where he got frustrated because there was so much retrenchment, especially beginning in the late 80s, and he started seeing how there was a concerted effort to roll back all of the progress that was made, and he saw it building. He tried to warn people about it. I think a good example is when Justice Roberts was appointed to the court, and he warned the Senate. You may remember, he went to testify, and he warned them, like, you really need to pay very close attention, not just to someone's credentials, but to where they stand. We all loved him. We loved him so much, and we love each other. And he set this tone in the family of that everybody is a part of it. Everybody is, we all look out for each other, and we all. I think that makes us want to carry that out, and we just loved him.
What an amazing father and mentor. And I know from being a daughter how proud she must be just to see all of his legacy and everyone that he's impacted. Yeah, they were very close-knit, and we know that she will miss her dad like the rest of us will. Well, that does it for this edition of Let's Talk Cincy. Thanks for joining us. And of course, we want to hear from you. Email us at ltc@WLWT.com. Stay encouraged. We'll see you next time.